Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I am Doug Trout. I'm a medical officer with the construction program at the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, or NIOSH. I'm happy to be here to moderate today's webinar on nanomaterials in construction, CPWR research and resources. Thanks for joining us today, and we really, I think you're in for a treat with a great webinar. And now I'd like to introduce today's panelists. Gavin West is the Director of Nanomaterials Research with CPWR and leads the center's work to improve understanding and awareness of nanomaterials in construction. Dr. Bruce Lippy is a longtime safety and health professional, president of the Lippy Group, and a consultant to Gavin's team at CPWR. And William Harris is a research analyst with the CPWR Data Center. William will be talking about the interactive data dashboards, which are new and which are on the CPWR website. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Gavin to get us started. Gavin?
Thanks so much. Glad to be here today, and I'm glad to see that we've got a good number of folks in attendance. So I'm going to share my screen so we can jump right in here. So as Doug mentioned, we're going to be talking about both the research as well as the resources that CPWR has developed. And so after today, you will be able to, one, summarize what is known about the use of nanomaterials in construction, exposure risks, and controls. And so I'll be presenting that portion of the talk, and it's not going to be a deep dive, but I hope it will provide some useful context and an overview to kind of set the tone and help you understand the purpose of some of these resources that we've developed. And you will be able to use CPWR resources to identify and manage risks posed by nanomaterials and to increase awareness around these issues. And Bruce and William are going to be covering that portion of the talk. And so one step back further, what is nanotechnology? This is a screenshot of nano.gov, which is maintained by the National Nanotechnology Initiative, which is a federal initiative in which agencies including NIOSH, OSHA, and many other federal agencies participate. And there's a lot of great information on this website. You can go here to nano.gov, including this definition of nanotechnology. Well, nanotechnology is the understanding and control of matter at the nanoscale at dimensions between approximately 1 and 100 nanometers, where unique phenomena enable novel applications. So if we break down the pieces of this definition, there have been advances in technology that really enable us to do new things with matter and design materials at this very tiny size range. And we'll give some examples of how small we're talking about. And that enables, these novel applications, unique properties. So as I mentioned, nanoscale materials can have unusual physical, chemical, and biological properties. Well, let's give an example here. We're all familiar with gold. It's in our everyday lives. We like the color of it. We use it as jewelry. It's chemically inert. It's non-magnetic. How does that change at the nanoscale? So nano-sized gold can be red or purple, depending on its size. It can also be magnetic and explosive. So you can see some of the different shades here of gold as it varies in size at the nanoscale. And here's an example of the size range we're talking about. One atom of gold is about 1/3 of a nanometer in diameter. This is very tiny. We're talking about, for a 1 nanometer particle, close to the atomic scale. Here's another example. We use this one in our training. A yardstick, which I think we're mostly familiar with here in this country, is roughly equivalent to a meter. And 1 nanometer is a billionth of a meter. So think about cutting this yardstick into a billion sections. You need a very, very teeny tiny saw. And what is an engineered nanomaterial, which you may see abbreviated in this talk as ENM? It's an object, 1 to 100 nanometers in this nanoscale size range in at least one dimension. So that could be its length or diameter, and created by human beings for some purpose. And what you see here, these are all the same chemical compound, zinc oxide, but our ability to understand and control matter enables us to create zinc oxide with all these different sizes and shapes, which again can influence its chemical, biological, and physical properties. Ultrafine particles, which are in the same size range, less than 100 nanometers, and this is an older term, also occur naturally and can be created unintentionally. So these are not engineered particles. We're not creating them for some purpose, but there are ultrafine particles in volcanic ash, as shown on this slide. Or we know there are ultrafine particles, very small particles in welding fumes, which are known to be harmful. So these are more of a byproduct of the process. They're not created intentionally to be used for some type of industrial application, for example. Now, a growing body of evidence suggests ultrafine particles may play a bigger role in inflicting adverse health impacts than recognized previously, including effects on the brain. So I find this to be quite scary when you think about neurodegenerative diseases, because at this point in time, we can hope for new scientific breakthroughs, but we don't have a lot in the way of treatments for these types of diseases. It's really, the focus really needs to be on prevention. And so this was an article, a perspective published just last year in Environmental Science and Technology. And it doesn't differentiate between engineered nanoparticles and these, combustion-derived nanoparticles from a health perspective. Both are important to consider in terms of public health, and some of the mechanisms of how they behave in the body are similar. And so I think we're all familiar with, or some of us are familiar with PM 2.5 or PM 10, which are measures of particulate matter, which US clean air standards are based on. And this article questions whether we should be looking at air pollution standards which focus more on this ultrafine fraction. And so 2.5 is 2.5 microns. That's about 2,500 nanometers. And so ultrafine is contained within that, but these are larger cutoffs, which our current standards are based on. And it uses this case study of Mexico City and points to evidence that people living closer to highways have higher risk of Alzheimer's disease, and also presents data where nanoparticles have been found in critical brain cell organelles in young adults as well as children in Mexico City, and also evidence of neurological abnormalities and associated with this exposure, which in Mexico City is often above levels designated by the US clean air standards. So over 40,000 nanotoxicology studies have been published over the last 2 decades. So commercialization of engineered nanomaterials really started to take off in the early 2000s. And I think the scientific and regulatory community were very forward-looking and initiated a lot of this risk assessment research soon after this started to happen. So we could really try to identify and address these risks in a forward-looking way. Compared to larger particles of the same chemical composition, nanoparticles can exhibit increased toxicity for the same amount of mass, be more likely to deposit in the respiratory tract. They can cross cell membranes where larger particles cannot, for example, the blood-brain barrier, as we kind of alluded to in that prior slide. And in some studies have shown nanoparticles to penetrate healthy, intact skin, and also in some instances to be able to translocate to other organs. Nanoparticles in powder form can also present fire or explosion hazards. And so this is because as particle size decreases, the minimum amount of energy needed to ignite those particles also decreases. And so this is an attempt at kind of distilling down some of the reasons why we're concerned about the health effects of nanoparticles. But as we saw in this last slide, there is a wealth of data out there, and this article that this is from is looking at some of the databases that have tried to distill this information down into actionable information for policymakers. From CPWR's perspective, how do we communicate this to workers? And so, it's a vast amount of data that's out there for a large number of materials. And so, it can be difficult to kind of distill this down. And really a lot of it needs to happen on a case-by-case basis. So are all nanomaterials and nanomaterial containing products inherently toxic? I'll pose this question to you in the audience. So the answer is no. I put the slide back up because to show the point that even within the same type of nanoparticle, if you look at for example, a chemical compound, for example, there can be, very many differences in terms of the structure and the properties, which could influence their toxicity. So so different types of nanomaterials can vary, and even within the same type of nanomaterial, their properties can also vary. CPWR researchers and collaborators have been working to answer these questions. Based on available products, where is their potential for exposure? What forms of engineered nanomaterials are released from construction materials? What levels of exposure are likely during different tasks? Do these exposures exceed occupational exposure limits or pose health risks? And are exposure controls effective? So again, this is not going to be a deep dive, but I'd like to go through some of this. CPWR maintains the most comprehensive source of information on reported use of nanomaterials in construction. The link is here to our eLCOSH Nano Construction Nanomaterial Inventory. So these are based primarily on claims from manufacturers about the use of nanomaterials in commercially available construction products, and also in some cases they're precursors. And my colleague Sarah Brooks maintains this. This is updated regularly, and I won't go into too much detail because Bruce is going to be talking about this more when he covers our resources, as well as William with this dashboard that we developed based on data from this inventory. Toxicology and exposure studies have primarily examined nanomaterials before they're added to products like coatings or cement. So, dealing with types of nanomaterials you might encounter in a laboratory where they have been produced and could pose risk to personnel working in the laboratory. Or, for example, looking at exposures in a factory where you might see this type of enclosed furnace used to produce carbon nanotubes. So, construction is a different animal. Compare those to nanomaterials used in cement, and what's coming out of that cement when different tasks are being performed on it. Or think about how exposure controls may differ. For example, with this enclosure for a bridge lead abatement project. CPWR has studied release of engineered nanomaterials from construction products and measured exposure levels during a range of tasks. So we've looked at materials both with and without the nanomaterials present, and also looked at different controls. Some of the tasks we've examined include spraying and sanding of various paints and coatings and sealants. We've looked at drilling, cutting, and nailing of roofing tiles, as well as cutting, grinding, and pointing of mortar and cement. And most studies, including the ones that we've conducted, show that engineered nanomaterials tend to remain embedded in the construction materials to which they are added. So this is presumed to be a good thing, that they'll pose less risk in this form as opposed to freely dispersed materials, which are most often the subject of these toxicological studies. But there is a difference between the nanoparticles you see on the right contained in the sanding debris compared to the zinc oxide nanoparticles within these paint droplets on the left. You have to think about, once they're inhaled, how could that behave differently in the body with being embedded in a solid material versus a liquid. And we have also observed release of free engineered nanomaterials during some construction activities. So this, even though this doesn't appear to be the norm, data show that there are some releases where it's more akin to the material before it's added to the construction product. And NIOSH has 3 recommended exposure limits, or RELs, for nanomaterials. There's one for carbon nanotubes and nanofibers, another for titanium dioxide, and a third for silver. I would note that OSHA at this point in time does not have any permissible exposure limits for nanomaterials, which are enforceable under regulations. And there's a link here where you can find these current intelligence bulletins. And CPWR studies show potential to exceed the NIOSH recommended exposure limits, depending on factors which can influence the exposures. For example, the amount of time the worker spends doing the task. But there is potential to exceed these during airless spraying paint. So that's one of the tasks that we've highlighted is posing a risk of overexposure. CPWR also collaborates with NIOSH Health Effects Laboratory Division researchers to conduct integrated exposure and toxicity research. So this is this idea of, needing to look at the potential health effects of, what construction workers are more likely to be exposed to, which differ from, laboratory and manufacturing settings. And so here's a photo of Dr. Jenny Roberts from NIOSH speaking with a CPWR study participant through an observation window of the test chamber where we've conducted some of our studies. And I would say on the health effects side that, the verdict is still out, but at least some of the results are encouraging from a worker's perspective, showing what I said earlier, that not all nanomaterials are inherently toxic based on some of these results so far. Some other good news is that CPWR studies show that engineering controls effectively reduce nanoparticle exposures. So as we move down from the most effective of in the hierarchy of controls to least effective downwards, we've shown that engineering controls are very effective, including this local exhaust ventilation shown on the slide attached to a power sander. Moving down to PPE, I wanted to mention that we've shown that wet methods also work in addition to ventilation. And yes, going down to the lower rung of the hierarchy with PPE, there's a question we often receive. Do respirators work? Yes, HEPA filters do capture nanoparticles. They're actually most challenged at 0.3 microns, which is about 300 nanometers. And they do a better job of filtering out larger and smaller particles, including nanoparticles. And on the right, I'm not going to show this video, but this is one that we show during some of the trainings we conduct, and it really kind of explains some of the physics in terms of how how filtration works. NIOSH published some very helpful new guidance last year with this technical report on occupational exposure sampling. And it sets forth exposure monitoring program goals, the first of which is to maintain exposures below NIOSH recommended exposure limits and to minimize exposure to engineered nanomaterials in the case where we do not have a recommended exposure limit. And OSHA has a fact sheet that I've included the link to on the slide where they provide support for this guidance from NIOSH and say that employers should be assessing exposures, keeping them below the RELs, and similarly minimizing them when we don't have established OELs. And it also talks about existing OSHA standards that may apply to nanomaterials. So with that, I would like to pass. Sorry, I had another animation there. And with that, I would like to pass it along to my colleague, Dr. Bruce Slippy. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Let me bring up, let me see here. All righty. Can everyone see that?
We can, there you go.
All right, good. Thanks again, Gavin. I really appreciate that. This is a shot of inside our chamber where we've conducted a number of studies. Gavin gave you some of the results. I just want to say this is we're in our 10th year of research, 2 5-year grants from NIOSH, and it's been a real honor and so professionally rewarding to do this work. So I really appreciate it. I spent my birthday in a suit and a powered air purifying respirator a couple years ago, but it felt fine. Let me see here. Trying to advance. Oh, there we go. So I would like to talk about hazard communication and where we are with that for Nano. It's been an issue for me. I have in the past used the analogy of a car and shown this Yugo in this particular shade as sort of analogy of how quality we are as far as the safety data sheets for Nano. There has been some improvement. I think we may have moved up to this particular shade and new hubs, but it's still not where it should be. Back in 2009, I spoke at an EPA-sponsored international conference in Chicago, and the title of my presentation says it all. MSDSs fail to communicate the hazard of nanotechnologies to workers. This was based on 49 safety data sheets that NIOSH, Chuck Geraci, specifically was kind enough to share with us, so my LIPI group could do some analysis of it. And they clearly weren't up to the task of communicating what workers need to know. They were failed, but that's not just us. Internationally, there have been studies done. I'm going to walk through some of these towards the more modern ones. 2010, Safe Work Australia also found safety data sheets lacking. They looked at 50 of them, and they said 18% were assessed as providing reliable information to appropriately inform an occupational risk assessment. Well, that's the basis of what we do, risk assessment. And do forgive me with a shot of the kangaroos. I just think they're fantastic. The idea of having a permanent pocket, how pragmatic does it get? I would never lose my reading glasses. This is great. Let me move on. Korean researchers, Ji-Hyun Lee and his colleagues, now in 2012, looked at 97 safety data sheets, and they used the global harmonization system criteria. And they said information was missing on routes of entry, toxicology, and protective measures. And they also said widespread use of OELs for the bulk form posed real problems to workers. And to give you an example, the NIOSH recommended exposure limit for carbon nanotubes is 1 nanogram per cubic meter. But if you look at these OELs for carbon nanotubes, quite often they're using bulk materials that have PELs of 5 milligrams per cubic meter. So it's really a disservice, a huge disservice. So in 2019, NIOSH did a study of 67 safety data sheets. And these researchers, Laura Hudson, Adrian Eastlake, and Richard Herbers, had done previous work. But this 67, they used 2 separate criteria to try to evaluate the quality of these safety data sheets. And they said 3% were satisfactory and 79% needed significant improvement, which is a real damning statement. We have over 900 products in our eLCOSH inventory, which I will show you. But we've seen very little useful information. In fact, most of the stuff we look at on these safety data sheets do not identify nanomaterials at all. So it's a problem, and I'll give you a little more demonstration of that in a second. Gavin mentioned this, but it's good to reiterate. There is no requirement to identify nanomaterials in safety data sheets. OSHA does not require that. In Europe, under REACH, you must have a registration dossier for Nano, and it's got to include all these things. You got to include the size, the shape, the aspect ratio, assembly structure, rigidity, crystallinity, surface functionalization, and surface area. That's such a step forward from where we are, but we are getting better because OSHA's got to revise the HAZCOM standard 1910-1200. to meet the requirements of the global harmonization system. And what that says is the manufacturers are going to have to now report particle size and, quote, if available and appropriate, unquote, shape, aspect ratio, and surface area. If available and appropriate is some real squeezy words. I'm not sure that we're going to get much help there. You can drive a truck through that. But particle size is a game changer. If manufacturers have to list particle size in safety data sheets, you'll be able to say, well, this one is between 1 and 100 nanometers. I've mentioned this before. There's good guidance available for writing nano safety data sheets. The International Standards Organization has a technical specification 13329, and it really lays out systematically what should be in a good safety data sheet. I chaired the subcommittee that was working on revising this. This is a 2012 document, but it's still good. And one of the things it says that I really like is that you need to provide a safety data sheet for nanomaterials and nanomaterial containing products, regardless of whether the material is classified as hazardous. So it's the precautionary principle that Europeans use much more than we do in this country. So that's good. And we use this in the tool I will demonstrate for you. Now, I spoke to the OSHA Advisory Committee on Construction Safety and Health back in November of 2012. And I had a number of suggestions about, and I spoke about nano safety data sheets, but I said, you know, OSHA, you have great e-tools. If you go to their site, they have a ton of them and they're well done for the most part. Why not do one on nano safety data sheets? Well, a scant decade later, nothing has happened. So we've taken the initiative and posted a safety data sheet guidance document. Bill Perry, who was higher up at OSHA and retired, did the majority of the work, and he did a great job. And so this is a nano safety data sheet improvement tool. And this is for a very tight audience. It's for manufacturers, distributors, and importers of the products to evaluate their safety data sheet. So we don't expect to get 1 million hits on this, but and we've been teaching the folks in our courses, if you run into a safety data sheet, you can contact the manufacturer and say, do you know about this tool? Have you ever tried to look at these carefully? And let me go into the website here and demonstrate. I hope everybody can see that. If not, somebody speak up. It's like any site that we have frequently asked questions that you can look at, but let's look at evaluating the safety data sheet.
We can't see it. I think you're sharing the PowerPoint instead of your screen.
Oh, okay.
You go to back down to or stop share and then back to share screen.
Oh, okay.
And be able to see exactly what you're looking at.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to see where that is. There we go. See it now?
Yes.
Excellent. So I'm sorry, frequently asked questions, but let's look at evaluate your safety data sheet. And we've set this up so that you can save your work on the site and go back to it. So you have to set up a login and get a password, but you don't have to. You can bypass login, which I'm doing right now, and you can create, and I'm going to put my company in here, and the product name is Excellent Coatings, and pick the date of the most recent version, and then any other safety data sheet identifiers, which I'm not going to include that. But then this brings up the 16 sections, and there are 62 questions, and I'm not going to go through all of them, please trust me. But what I want to show you is that as you go through it, you see product info is now green. So if we take identification, for instance, here, it says, have you followed the 16 safety data sheet sections recommended by GHS? Yeah, we have. If you do not have information for all the sections, have you indicated not available in those sections rather than leave them blank? Now that's an OSHA requirement. We said sure. Have you included in the safety data sheet the product identifier used on the label and any other common names or synonyms, which is really important? Sure we have. Have you included the name, address, and phone number of the manufacturer, the importer, or other responsible party, as well as an emergency phone number? Yes, we did. And have you included recommended use of the product? Yes. And does it contain the date it was prepared or last updated? Oops, no, we didn't do that. So I'm putting a no in there. Now we can go to the next here. And that sends down to section 2, hazard identification, but we don't have to do these in order. You can just go down. So let's do first aid measures. Does the safety data sheet describe first aid measures effectively in treating persons affected by exposure to the nanomaterial? Yes. Does it include first aid measures relevant to all routes of exposure and are recommended medical treatments specified? Yeah, we didn't do a very good job with that. So I've only looked at these 3 sections out of all this, but I can view recommendations. So I'm going to just do that. And it says, are you sure? Which is a good question to answer. You've only answered 8 of 62 total questions, but I can say, yes, continue. And then you get this report that you can download. Now, again, I'm not logged into this at all other than I don't have a password or anything like that, but I can download a PDF. And you can see here it's saying recommended safety data sheet improvements based on the answers you provided. And it says in section 1, go ahead and indicate somewhere in a prominent area that the date was prepared or last updated. And in first aid measures, the safety data sheet should describe first aid measures to every possible route of exposure, reflecting any differences in first aid because of the routes of exposure. And it should also indicate signs and symptoms of exposure by each route and whether the effects are acute or delayed. And it's based on this OSHA brief. So it's a very useful tool, and I hardly recommend, if you deal with these at all, is you go ahead and pass this along to others. CPWR has also created a lot of trade-specific training, and these materials are generally around 1 to 2 hour awareness sessions. And here's Gavin talking to the Heavy Equipment Operators Union. I used to work with them. They're a great bunch. And
Bruce, I think you need to switch back to the PowerPoint.
Oh, thanks. So I stop sharing here and go back. Yeah. All right. Let me. Oh, this is it. There we go. Can you see that?
Yes.
Great. Gavin's so kind to his elders. I really like working with the guy. So we really made this trade specific in that we have for each trade, of course, some of the products that they use and a safety data for them, and we do exercises with that. What I'm really pleased about, we've also in this training integrated a 6-month survey. So 6 months down the road after they're trained, we send out the survey to see if they're using our curriculum. We were concerned from the beginning that these are great trainers, but they're not science-based. And Nano's got a lot of science in it. So we're thinking, are these folks really going to use our materials? Well, they are. We had 37 trainers respond to the survey, and a subset of those indicated they used our materials in 49 courses. So these might be apprenticeship classes, but they're sticking this in. And they reached 820 students. So I think some of my friends from the AIHA Nano group might be on the call. We're looking for other homes for this curriculum. Now we're winding down our last year of research. And so the Good Nano Guide might be one. So looking for ideas. Other resources, I want to just take a second here and take you to eLCOSH Nano. I guess I have to stop sharing. And try this again.
Yeah, if you just share your screen, like instead of sharing an application, you should be able, like, pick screen 1 or screen 2 if you have multiple screens. You should be able to just show us whichever is on your screen. How you're doing it is fine too.
Is this working?
I'm still seeing the PowerPoint slide.
Oh. Try it one more time here. How about this? There we go. Can you see that?
Yep.
Ah, wonderful. All right, so this is eLCOSH. It's the old man of our websites. It's decades old, but we keep adding new material, and it's an electronic library of construction safety and health. And I just want to point out that if you do training, we have tons of PowerPoints and presentations here. We did 52 toolbox talks initially, working from drafts that NIOSH put together that we finished. But we have lots more. So, toolbox talks are like the crux of training for the construction industry. Most firms use toolbox talks. Also, we have images. If you do a training, even professional, we have over 1,000 images that you can pull up. And I'm going to pick this one right now. This is a crane shot. My brother, who's an industrial photographer, took this. What I want to point out is on our website, we list if it's a good practice or not. We were finding folks pulling images that were terrible and thinking that's the way to do it. So all of ours says it was good or bad practice. I would also point out that up top here, it says version en español. So much of what we have on the site can be converted immediately back into English or back into Spanish, depending, and there's other languages too. But the last thing I want to point out is here's eLCOSH Nano. It's on that site. And eLCOSH Nano is the home for all of our inventory and other materials. And I'm just going to give you a quick look at this. We have, again, 900 plus products. They're listed by these categories. Some are voluminous. So you have 146 products that are multi-surface coatings, whereas some are just caulking. We only have 2. But it's a way to take a look at these and use them in various ways. I know that the trades look at these quite a bit. We also have a news and information section that has lots of great pieces. And again, they're categorized by topic. For instance, we have 319 articles, and these are all pulled for the most part by Sarah Brooks, who's done a great job with this. And these products these articles are on all kinds of things, but you can do great sorting and checking and find what you need. So anyway, that's eLCOSH Nano. It's I hope some folks use it. I'm going to close that up and go back to my PowerPoint. And move on. Just want to quickly finish up here. We have Nano Toolbox Talks. 30,000 have been downloaded the last 5 years. You can see pictures here. This again is something that NIOSH came up with. We've added a little bit of innovation in that on the front cover of the other page of the Toolbox Talk, there's instructions for the person doing the toolbox talk. So, and generally it has a case study. It's got questions to ask the audience, but the side you're looking at is on the back side, and that allows the company to post it in a trailer or a bulletin board, and it gives the key points at the bottom with a strong illustration in the middle. We have hazard alert on nanomaterials. 5,000 of these cards have been printed or downloaded electronically, and they all have we have lots of hazard alert cards. They all have the same thing, 1, 2, 3. So in this case, learn about the nanomaterials in your trade, control the dust, and wear a respirator. Again, available in Spanish. I want to give a shout out to NIOSH's nanotechnology website. It's got very useful information on exposures and controls. And the guidance is all there. And NIOSH has the best guidance going as far as nanomaterials, in my estimation. Also, shout out to AIHA Nano and Advanced Materials Working Group. They are continuing to promote the nano health and safety. And there's, I think, about 100 people. These are industrial hygienists who work with nano. So it's a great group. And I'm very pleased to be a part of that. Gavin also works with them. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to William Harris to give you a preview of one of our newest things, the Nanomaterials Dashboard. And I'm going to stop sharing and hope something happens here.
Yep. Thank you, Bruce.
You're on, man. Thanks.
My name is William Harris. I'm a research analyst with the CPWR Data Center, and I played a role in helping to design and bring this nanomaterial dashboard to life. And I'm pretty excited to be able to share some of it with you and give you all a live demo. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And starting on the CPWR.com homepage, the way to navigate to this dashboard is under our research tab. You look at our data center right here. We have a data dashboards page. On this page, you'll navigate down to find nanomaterials in construction, and that'll bring you to this resource. So this data dashboard, like every data dashboard, has an introduction section at the beginning that gives a little bit of background for the dashboard that you're about to see. And as part of this introduction, we also link out to the eLCOSH Nano Inventory that Bruce highlighted earlier in the presentation. As Gavin mentioned earlier as well, this dashboard utilizes data from the eLCOSH Nano Inventory database, and it's presented in what I believe to be a pretty intuitive way to help kind of characterize what otherwise might be lost in a series of lists or individual products. So the dashboard itself starts out with a tab that explains kind of the general characteristics of the information in the database. So we have four main charts on this first tab. That being a chart in the top left, this pie chart that shows the number of products by nanomaterial. Then we can see the number of safety data sheets that are available online in the database. Then we can look and even see the number of recorded recorded products containing nanomaterials in the bottom left by associated trade. And we can kind of see a quick breakdown that concrete and cement masons have the most associated products that contain nanomaterials. And then we can even see the types of products that are most common that contain nanomaterials, including paints and coatings, pre-market additives, cement and concrete, and so on. Now, one of the main features of this dashboard is the ability to essentially interact with each of these charts. So for each of these charts, you can actually mouse over any one of the slices or even the numbers that you see here and get a little bit more information or see just a characterization of what's there. So for instance, in this bottom left, we can see that 22.6% of products in the database are associated with concrete and cement masons. Additionally, one of the things that I want to highlight here is that while there is a lot of information in the eLCOSH Nano database, there are still a lot of these products that contain these engineered nanomaterials that do not have a determined chemistry. And so we can see that about 38.2% of products in the database have an undetermined chemistry, which is something to keep note of. We can get some more detailed information from this dashboard by going to the Nanomaterials tab. And here we can see the exact number of products by nanomaterial for many of the different nanomaterials that we have recorded. So these are sorted by ascending number. So you can start at polymers, for which the largest number of products contain, going all the way down to carbon and cerium oxide. This other category has a large number of different products that might have anywhere from 5 to even 1 product in the database. And you can see the list of those products here in the footnote. Next, we can actually look at these nanomaterials by trade. being able to look at these by associated trade is what I believe to be a very valuable aspect of this dashboard, because it enables you to answer questions if you're involved in a particular one of these trades about just how many different products that are out there that could be affecting potential workers. So for instance, if I'm a safety officer for a contractor and we have a lot of carpenters, and we're wondering just how exposed they are to these products or nanomaterials, we can go to this tab and we can see that carpenters are about the 4th highest trade with these associated nanomaterial containing products. And we can go a little bit further with that as well with this last tab that we have on the dashboard. This last tab allows you to not only look at the total number of products for each of these trades, but also allows you to see just what types of nanomaterials are in those products. So again, using that example, the safety officer, for interested in carpenters, we can see a breakdown of the different types of nanomaterials and their composition that are in the products most closely associated with carpenters. So we can see that of the compositions that we know of, zinc oxide is the one that appears the most. Now, one of the main advantages of this type of dashboard layout is that in the future, when we're doing more work related to products containing nanomaterials, we can continue to expand or add data to this dashboard. In addition, if there's any data or information that you'd like to see on this dashboard but is not otherwise available, we do take suggestions, and we welcome you to email us at either datacenter@cpwr.com, or you can email Gavin West directly at gwest@cpwr.com for suggestions or questions related to how the dashboard is set up, or for more information on the data that includes. And with that, I'll go ahead and stop sharing so that we can go ahead and take any questions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gavin, Dr. Lippy, and William, for all that great information. We have had a few questions in the chat, which we've tried to answer along the way, but we have some other questions. And I think some of the questions that were submitted ahead of time, you have partially answered, but I think they deserve, maybe going over again. So maybe the first one, if we'll kind of go in order, maybe this one for Gavin. So why are nanomaterials being used? So we're going to get to the, we've talked about some of the risks and benefits, but what some of the information we went over talked about risk. Why are nanomaterials being used?
Thanks, Doug. I think that's a really good question. And, it's something that we cover in a lot of our presentations, but, just with the focus today, we didn't spend as much time on that area. And I would say there is information we can see by going through the eLCOSH Nano Inventory that gets to that question somewhat and talks about, for specific products, how the properties that will be added. And in construction in general, I think there's a lot of promise also in related industries with transportation, infrastructure, energy, where nanomaterials can really increase energy efficiency, and they can be a green technology to address issues related to environment. So to give some examples, nanotechnology has enabled very efficient forms of insulation. It's used in smart windows or in new types of solar panels that are being developed. The production of concrete actually accounts for about 7%, 6 to 7%, depending on which source you look at, of global carbon dioxide emissions. And so, being able to strengthen concrete can have advantages for infrastructure projects where you have longer lasting, bridges and things of that nature, and also more durable materials and requirements for less materials. So there's a lot of benefits to why to using nanomaterials, and that's why we're seeing them not just in the construction sector, but in a lot of different industries, including medicine. Nanomedicine is another big one, but I'll stop there so we can get some other questions.
Right. So they're being used all throughout manufacturing, construction, so widely, and information on that is certainly available at the NIOSH website. But in the chat, we have placed already several times the Nano eLCOSH Nano Inventory. So just to give people if you haven't seen that site, I would recommend going to that site. It gives why the question, why are they being used and where are they being used, can be partially answered at that inventory, and it provides a range of the wide number of products and substances that could potentially contain nanomaterials. So then the next kind of in order, what do we know about the health effects in general of nanomaterials? And I'll start. That's a big question, and there is no one answer to it. That's an area of research, and NIOSH is one of the groups that's performing research on the health effects. And so NIOSH has created. The presenters have talked about specific documents and specific nanomaterials, including titanium dioxide, nanosilver, and carbon nanotubes. And those are some of the materials for which we have the greatest amount of information about health effects. But this is an active area of research. And so that would be my comment. Any other comments on from Gavin or Dr. Lippy on what do we know about the health effects?
Yeah, I think we didn't go into detail on that, and I would recommend what Doug mentioned, looking at the current intelligence bulletins, because they really go through in detail, the studies for those specific materials, where we have a lot more data, more understanding of the health effects, and a lot of that comes from extrapolating from animal models and cellular models. I think we have less actual human health data from epidemiological studies. More of that tends to be cross-sectional. I'd say very little that's applicable to construction workers, more in the manufacturing settings. And there have been studies that have looked at biomarkers, which are indicative of potential chronic health effects. But I think that like Doug said, that the more research needs to be done to better answer those questions. And Bruce, you're going to
I would also say, a lot of the materials we're looking at are not manufactured in huge quantities, but there are legacy materials like carbon black. Paul Schulte brings that up, that, been making that stuff in huge quantities for a long time. And we know their health effects, and they are nanomaterial sized particles in carbon black, along with bigger stuff. It's not a purified kind of material, but from these legacy materials, we do have some grasp on the harmful effects, and carbon black is one. Right.
Yeah, and just to amplify that, and Gavin mentioned it. Gavin, you mentioned in your talk that nano-sized materials are not new. So in fact, many of the materials that we have studied as a larger group includes larger size particles and smaller size particles. So in fact, we know the information we know about health effects on carbon materials may in fact apply to some of these smaller size carbon nanotubes. But it is an area of research. So these are all, we're talking about the need for research, but, I would say, what's the good news? And the good news from some of the NIOSH work and the work that CPWR is doing is that controls do work. And so I know Dr. Lippy and Gavin, you both mentioned this in your talk, the use of the hierarchy of controls to prevent exposures and health effects. And so we know that currently available filter materials for industrial filters for respirators do filter out nanomaterials. We know that some of the practices higher in the hierarchy of controls to prevent dust exposure can prevent exposure to nanomaterials. So just maybe comment, Gavin, maybe you could start comment on, how can we confidently control exposure to nanomaterials, or what are some of the areas of research that are still going on, or what should workplaces do now while some of the health effect research is going on?
Yeah, and I tried to. I wanted to hit some of those points in my talk, and I think they're definitely worth emphasizing in terms of the good news there, and that tends to be, wherever you look, whether it's internationally or authoritative guidance from agencies like NIOSH, in the US, or the WHO, that we should be taking steps to minimize exposures, until we understand the health effects better. And I think our work and others show that you can do that we know that these engineering controls work, we know they're effective. And in construction, I think we're controlling for other hazards as well. We look at table 1 controls for silica. And so you might have, there could be a case where, you're already going to be using controls for silica and things like engineering controls, wet methods, and LEV that we've looked at, local exhaust ventilation, will control those nanoparticle exposures as well. So, I think that Bruce, did you want to jump in as well?
I just want to mention that if you look at any international guidance for nano, they always include the hierarchy of controls. It's such a powerful model that I think, and also when we do training, and I was doing it 2 weeks ago down in New Orleans, workers really have a problem with the idea that the HEPA can capture these small particles. That just doesn't make sense if the particle we talk about HEPA being 0.3 of a micron or 300 nanometers. How can you keep a 20 nanometer particle from zipping right through? And so we need to do more. And Gavin pointed out that video. It's short and it's really good. So anybody's out there who does training, I'm sure the question comes up, and the video does a lovely job of that in about 2 minutes.
Yeah, just to reiterate, I think, Gavin, what you had said and what Dr. Lippy just mentioned is that the most penetrating particle size for filter materials commonly used is 0.3 microns, which is larger than most of these nanomaterials that we're talking about. So, in other words, the filters have increasing effectiveness as it gets smaller into the nanomaterial size range. If I said that correctly.
No, that's right.
So we have a couple other questions that are specific. What nanomaterials do you see in the stone, or do we have any experience with nanomaterials exposure in the stone countertop industry, particularly in the construction installation of the stone countertops, maybe cutting of the stone countertops?
Gavin, you may have spent more time with it, but one of the things I would like to emphasize is let's not lose track of the toxins we know out there. So the crystalline silica is a real threat in construction, and OSHA standard has done a good job with trying to control that. So I would be more concerned about crystalline silica unless that's not part of the counter. I don't know. Gavin, do you have more understanding of the countertops?
In terms, very specifically to countertops, I'm not sure how applicable the products are, but I know there are products in the inventory that are, designed for stone surfaces, porous surfaces, and you have some of these penetrating or densifying sealers to increase the density of materials. Whether they're how frequently those are used for that specific application, I honestly don't know. But I think that somebody who was interested could go through the inventory and look at the products that are for those types of materials and see if any could be used for countertops.
Great, yeah, and I think this specific question gets back to the larger question that we asked earlier, and the point is, we know there's hazards to some of these operations and many others, and if we control the hazards that we know about, we will also, to the best of our knowledge now, control the exposure to the nanomaterials that may be there as well.
Absolutely, Doug.
And I think that's
a critical point.
That's the key message, I think, from what we know now. As we've talked about, these are areas of research, and there's lots of people doing it, CPWR, NIOSH, and many others. And so I think we're at our hour.
Okay.
And I'd like to thank Gavin and Dr. Lippy and William for a great presentation. And I think where I know that the Gavin and William posted their email addresses in the chat. And so if there's any questions, they'd be happy to follow up. And same with me at NIOSH. So thanks for a great webinar today.
Sure.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Trout.
Yeah,
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.